Ever wonder how the first great global empires were built? What was the economic engine that fueled them? Well, for about 300 years, one big idea called the shots. It shaped nations, it started wars, and it moved millions of people across oceans, often against their will. That idea was mercantilism. And believe it or not, it all boils down to one simple question. So let me ask you, is the world's wealth a finite pie? I mean, is there a fixed amount of riches out there and that's it? How you answer that question, well, it changes everything. And for the guys building these empires, the answer was a loud, clear yes. And right there, that single yes gets us to the heart of mercantilism. See, people who believed in this didn't think the economy was something that could grow for everyone. Nope, for them, it was a brutal zero-sum game. Here's the core assumption. For mercantilists, wealth wasn't some abstract concept. It was physical stuff you could hold, gold and silver, what they called bullion. And their logic was pretty simple. If there's only so much gold and silver on the planet, then the only way for my country to get richer is to make your country poorer. Every single coin in my vault has to come from someone else's. Okay, so if it's a zero-sum game, how do you win? Well, the game plan was actually pretty straightforward. You sell as much of your stuff to other countries as you possibly can, and you buy as little from them as you can get away with. The whole point was to get a huge trade surplus, making sure way more gold was flowing into your country than was flowing out. And this wasn't just some vague suggestion. The government itself acted like the CEO of the entire national economy, directing everything toward this one single goal. So once you have the theory down, what's next? You start building. And that's just what they did. They began constructing these incredible, complicated, and let's be honest, often brutal systems to turn this idea into reality. They literally engineered their empires to serve this economic machine. And the first ones to go all in were Spain and Portugal. I mean, way back in 1494, they signed the Treaty of Tordesillas, where they basically drew a line on a map and split the rest of the world between the two of them. Talk about a monopoly. While Portugal got busy controlling the sea lanes, Spain hit the absolute jackpot in 1545. They found Potosi, a literal mountain of silver. So you had these two different models for building an empire. Portugal played gatekeeper. Their Feitoria system was this string of fortified trading posts along the coasts. They basically controlled all the choke points for the super valuable spice trade. If you wanted spices, you had to go through them. Spain, on the other hand, just went straight to the source. Their whole model was about digging up that silver at Potosi and shipping it straight back home to Europe. Now let's jump over to the Atlantic, because this is where mercantilism became this brutally efficient, closed-loop system known as the triangular trade. Here's how it worked. First, Europe sends manufactured goods, like guns and rum, to Africa. Then, those goods are traded for enslaved human beings who are forced onto ships for the horrific journey of the Middle Passage to the Americas. And finally, their forced labor produces raw materials like sugar, tobacco, and cotton, which get shipped back to Europe to fuel the factories that start the whole cycle over again. And we have to be crystal clear on this grim reality. The profitability of this whole system depended entirely on unpaid forced labor. In the cold, hard logic of mercantilism, human beings were listed on the balance sheets as capital assets, a resource to be exploited to keep the cost of raw materials down. This was the dark, horrifying heart of the empire's engine. Now, to keep this whole closed loop from leaking, empires passed really strict laws. The British Navigation Acts are the most famous example. They basically said that the colonies were forbidden, absolutely forbidden, from trading with anyone else. All their valuable stuff had to be sent to the mother country, and it had to be sent on the mother country's ships so it could all be controlled and taxed. It was a total economic lockdown. And for the people living in the colonies, this didn't just feel like bad business. It felt like a cage, and it planted the seeds of resentment that would eventually explode into revolution. But look, a system this rigid, this controlling, this exploitative, it just can't last forever. The very things that made it seem so powerful were also its greatest weaknesses. The whole thing was just too brittle, and eventually, the cracks started to show. So what went wrong? Well, a few big things. First, you had inefficiency. The government would grant monopolies to certain companies, and with no competition, they got lazy. Quality went down, prices went up. Second, the rules were so tight that smuggling became the real economy. It was a massive black market, and for a lot of colonists, it wasn't just about making a buck. It was about rebellion.
And third, Spain learned a painful lesson about economics. All that free silver they were digging up flooded their markets and caused runaway inflation, a price revolution that made their own money worth less and less. And let's not forget, this wasn't some friendly competition. Under mercantilism, trade really was war by other means. If another country was getting a bigger slice of that finite pie, you didn't innovate, you went and sank their ships. War wasn't seen as a failure of the system, it was a core part of its strategy. So with all the decay inside and constant fighting outside, the entire structure was groaning under its own weight. The old way just wasn't working anymore. And right into that moment of crisis, a new kind of threat appeared. But it wasn't a fleet of warships or a new cannon. It was something far more dangerous. It was an idea that would completely change what the word wealth even meant. In 1776, a guy named Adam Smith published a book called The Wealth of Nations, and it was like an intellectual bombshell. He argued that real wealth isn't a pile of gold you keep locked in a vault. True wealth, he said, is the total productivity of a nation, all the stuff it makes and all the commerce it engages in. And here was the real killer insight that flipped everything on its head. He showed that trade is not a zero-sum game. If two countries trade freely, the pie doesn't just get resliced. The whole pie actually gets bigger for everyone. This really lays out the massive shift in thinking. The old idea of a fixed pie that you had to fight over was replaced with a new idea, a growing pie of wealth that could be created. State-controlled monopolies gave way to the idea of individual competition, and all that protectionism was challenged by the radical, revolutionary concept of free trade. The whole worldview changed. Now, it's really tempting to look back at all this as just ancient history, right? Some old, dusty, debunked theory. But the ghost of mercantilism, well, it's still haunting us in ways that might feel surprisingly familiar. Think about it. Whenever you hear politicians today talking about trade wars or about putting up protective tariffs to shield their own industries from foreign competition, what are they really talking about? They're reaching for the exact same playbook, using the same tools, and often the same zero-sum logic that defined the entire mercantilist era centuries ago. And that kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. This system, built on the simple idea of a finite pie, created global empires and then watched them crumble. As we watch nations today still jockeying for economic advantage, you have to ask yourself, are we really as far away from that mindset as we like to think we are?